Welcome back. The fight over NSA leaker Edward Snowden is about many things: national security, serious alleged crimes, the right to privacy, loud echoes of the Cold War. It's also about one man's son, a son who's being called a whistleblower by some, a traitor by others. A son who's now stuck in limbo at an airport in Moscow while officials in Washington at the very highest levels are demanding him back. Their latest enticement, a promise not to seek the death penalty against him. In a moment, you'll hear from Edward Snowden's father, Lon, about what that's like. But first, how we got here.
My name's Ed Snowden. I'm 29 years old.
It's been nearly 2 months since Edward Snowden showed himself to the world as the source behind the NSA leaks. Snowden revealed the U.S. government had forced Verizon, a U.S. telecom company, to hand over the phone records of millions of Americans. He also revealed a secret program used by the NSA called PRISM, which gives the government direct access to data from internet companies like Google and Facebook. He gave this interview to The Guardian.
I think that the public is owed an explanation of the motivations behind the people who make these disclosures that are outside of the democratic model.
Snowden didn't hide his identity, but he did hide his exact location, revealing only that he was somewhere in Hong Kong and hinted at a life on the run.
I could be, rendered by the CIA. I could have people come after me. And that's a fear I'll live under for the rest of my life, however long that happens to be.
Reaction to Snowden's public revelations was mixed. A hero to some, but to others.
This guy is a traitor. He's a defector. He's not a hero.
It's a giant violation of the law.
I think he's a traitor.
5 days after Snowden's identity was revealed, he was charged with espionage. The U.S. sought Snowden's extradition from Hong Kong and revoked his passport. But days later, Snowden, with the help of WikiLeaks, managed to board a plane bound for Moscow. After arriving at the Moscow airport, he again went into hiding, never passing through immigration, staying within the airport's transit zone, with reporters from all over the world looking for him.
No sign of Edward Snowden. No one here seems to know where he is.
Moscow was never intended as a final destination. According to WikiLeaks, Snowden applied for asylum in more than 20 countries. For now, Snowden remains in the transit zone, keeping largely out of sight, except for this one press conference he gave nearly 2 weeks ago.
A little over 1 month ago, I had a family, a home in paradise, and I lived in great comfort. I also had the capability, without any warrant of law, to search for, seize, and read your communications. That is the power to change people's fates. It is also a serious violation of the law.
Snowden has applied for temporary asylum in Russia, saying he would be tortured and would face the death penalty if returned to the United States. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder assured the Russians the U.S. will not seek the death penalty if Snowden were returned to stand trial. So far, the Russians have refused to hand Snowden over. He remains in the airport, and according to his lawyer, he is studying Russian and may end up staying in the country long term. Joining us now is Lon Snowden, Edward Snowden's father, also Mr. Snowden's attorney, constitutional lawyer, and former Reagan Justice Department official, Bruce Fein. I appreciate both of you being here. First of all, your son is obviously still in the airport. Have you been able to communicate with him? Do you know how he's doing?
We've been able to communicate with him indirectly, and I believe he's in reasonably good spirits.
How does he look to you in that press conference?
He looks as if he's lost a bit of weight. He needs a haircut, but overall, he looks reasonably well, given his circumstances over the past 65 days.
Last week on NBC, you said the American people don't know the whole truth. The truth is coming. What do you think people don't understand about what your son did?
Well, I think probably the large majority of Americans, first of all, have not seen his 12-minute video. Mm-hmm. I've spoken to close friends who know this is my son, and we talk, and I realize they haven't listened to the video. They don't really understand what the Fourth Amendment is. So I think that there's much that's unknown. The American people, the media, to be quite honest, has not done a very good job of laying out the facts in digestible form. There has been a clear effort by those who have been threatened politically, and or embarrassed by these revelations to focus on the, so to speak, sinner, my son, who has revealed these, instead of the sins, the actual revelations. It's clear they don't want to discuss that. And so when I said the truth is coming, what I mean is there are certain folks, myself included, who are going to push and push and push until, at a minimum, we have a well-informed public who they have the facts and they can make their own determination.
One of the major truths here is that the conversation we're having tonight
the very strong debates that have occurred in the Congress, most recently a vote that lost by 12 votes to shut down these NSA programs, the fact that there'll be 3 hearings on Wednesday, they're all responsible because of what Ed Snowden did. We had the Director of National Intelligence Office say their goal was to keep the program secret forever. They tried. The only reason that this was broken into the public was because of Ed Snowden's courage. The members of Congress that knew about this were very cryptic in explaining exactly what was going on, despite the fact that they had a constitutional privilege to disclose this to the American people. And so what has happened is Ed Snowden has made the democratic process work. The things that we're talking about today, do we really need these kinds of programs?
Well, one of the things that your son had said was that he, sitting at his desk, a contractor, could gain access to basically anybody's email if he had the correct address, even the president's email. At the time, there were a lot of officials who said, oh, no, that's not true. He's overstating his own importance. Glenn Greenwald, who's one of the people who received the information from your son, has now come forward and said he has new reporting, which actually confirms what your son had been saying, that contractors, low-level people even, at their desk at the NSA or at some of these other contracting agencies, could actually gain access to tons of phone calls which are in data storage bases or people's emails. There's going to be testimony Wednesday. How confident are you that the truth of that is going to come out?
Well, I'm not sure if it's going to come out in the Senate Judiciary, because the same people who sat in front of the House Judiciary who were really grilled, I absolutely compliment those members on the House Judiciary for, I believe it was last Wednesday or the week prior, when they grilled these same individuals who are going to sit in front of the Senate Judiciary. But, you know, I'm disappointed that it's the Deputy Attorney General instead of Eric Holder sitting there, that it's the General Counsel for the Director of National Intelligence instead of James Clapper sitting there under oath again, and that it's the Deputy FBI Director instead of Mueller sitting there answering these questions.
If I could add, Anderson, remember that the people who are going to be testifying are working under the aegis of the director who, when confronted with a question by Senator Ron Wyden, are you collecting data on millions of Americans, hundreds of millions, Director Clapper said no. A flat-out lie, which he tried to defend as only a small untruth. And we're to...
He said not wittingly.
Not wittingly, as though the
later
NSA,
that it was erroneous,
he has $1 trillion of megabits, you know, unwittingly. But we're to rely upon their self-assessment as to whether or not these technologies exist. We need outside auditing of what the NSA has been doing all these years. The NSA at present doesn't have someone who's not part of their overall program examine whether they are complying with the requirement that they not look at the contents of information unless they have some reasonable suspicion or otherwise. And why would we expect an agency to call its own people to account?
In a letter to the Justice Department, to the Obama administration, you describe what your son did as civil disobedience. There are those who say, well, look, civil disobedience is accepting the ramifications of your actions, of your decision, of taking the punishment. Why do you see this as civil disobedience?
Well, first of all, I think he is accepting the consequences. Again, as if you look at his 12-minute video and what he said, he's not living a very comfortable life at this point. He said he's an American. He loves his country. I know my son. I know he loves his country. Well, you know, what he believed is that this information, the American people needed to be aware of what their government was doing to them, spying upon them. And, you know,
I could interject with this issue of civil disobedience. Anderson, if it were true that there was a comfort level that a fair trial would be offered to Mr. Snowden, I think your question would be far more pointed.
You don't believe a fair trial is possible?
Because what we've had, you've shown part of it in the introduction here. We've had 4, 5, 6 members of the administration, members of Congress, convicting Edward of treason. We haven't even had a single trial. We haven't even had an official grand jury indictment. They're already saying he's guilty of treason. We don't even have the Attorney General saying he enjoys a presumption of innocence. We have the President of the United States denigrating Mr. Snowden as a hacker, not somebody who was trying to generate the national conversation over these dragnet surveillance that the President himself said was urgent.
Well, that's what's interesting, because the President has said he wants this conversation. This is the conversation the American public need to have. Do you believe that this is a conversation?
No, absolutely I don't. It's one thing, you know, words mean one thing, actions mean another, and that's much in the same way of our national character. I'm really disappointed by what I've seen. You know, our national character, much as with individuals, is determined by what we do when we think that no one is watching, when we think that we won't be held accountable. And it's not just a matter of what's legal, of what's constitutional, it's a matter of what's ethical.
And think of this oddity as well, Anderson. The Attorney General writes a letter to the Ministry of Justice in Russia, and he has to go out of his way to say, we won't torture Edward if he comes back. We are at that position of a country where we need to give assurances to others we won't torture you like Bradley Manning.
Do you believe him when he says that? When he says that no death penalty and the United States doesn't torture?
Well, at this point, I believe it would be in the best interest of the Justice Department, and we've attempted to work with the Justice Department and both the people investigating this, and I just do not believe that that collaboration, the good faith exists anymore. So I'm very, very disappointed, and we've attempted to get assurances that Ed would receive a fair trial. I have absolutely no faith in Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States.
A couple of the things that he omitted.
You don't believe your son would receive a fair trial?
Absolutely not. Not at this point. No, absolutely not.
A couple of the things that the Attorney General omitted from his letter in trying to describe the fair trial Edward would receive would be the right to confront the witnesses or the evidence against him. No secret evidence. He didn't mention that. The right that Edward would have to summon witnesses in his favor. No mention of that. The presumption of innocence. No mention of that. Why? They seem very, very glaring, because we know that the government would try to claim classification, national security secrets. We can't disclose this to the defendant.
And when you see the way Bradley Manning was treated early on and in the conditions that he was confined in, do you believe your son would be basically held in those same conditions?
No, I think because that was so embarrassing to our government and the people who were responsible for it. But it doesn't change. It makes clear what the mindset is. President Obama, when he was first running for president, he talked about how how important whistleblowers were. Well, let's go back. June 7th, after this story broke, he told the American people that, hey, we're not reading your emails and we're not listening to your phone calls. On June 8th, a link on the White House website, I believe, that was linked to his language regarding whistleblowers and their importance, that disappeared.
We already know that's false anyway. The New York Times reported long ago that the NSA was reading or listening in to conversations between wives and servicemen serving abroad.
So I mean, there are those who see your son applying for even temporary asylum in Russia and look at Russia and say, well, look, that's a government that clearly has its own intelligence apparatus, that clearly does not value dissent from the top down. Should the place where your son is looking for asylum, should that impact the way people view what your son did?
Well, I think they have, again, to look at this in context. What choice does he have? He was attempting to go elsewhere, and clearly our government forced down the aircraft of Evo Morales, who was returning to Bolivia. And, again, I know that Bolivia, we have operatives in both Peru and Colombia. I don't believe that would be a safe place for him. I'm not sure what would happen if he went to Ecuador or Venezuela.
So you think Russia is maybe the best place for him?
I absolutely think that Russia is the best place for him at this point, and it is our government, specifically the Obama administration, that has caused that. Again, he was looking at going elsewhere. At this point, I would hope that I make no apologies, I would hope that he remains in Russia until we have assurances that he would receive a fair trial here, and much of that at this point probably depends on another presidential administration.
There's another element here, Anderson, I want to just flag here that's not been discussed at length, and that is the possibility that we have agreements with foreign intelligence agencies for them to circumvent the limits the NSA has on spying on Americans, and then we spy on their people and then share the information and intelligence. We know that all the uproar in Europe about our spying on their citizens, but the intelligence agencies said nothing. And that's a real worry that even the limits we would place on the NSA would be circumvented by the NSA going to the British, say, why don't you spy on American citizens? We'll say nothing. You hand over the information to us.
We'll see what comes out of testimony on Wednesday. I know you'll be watching very carefully. Lon Snowden, good to have you on, Mr. Fine, as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Coming up next.